Council. It is Tuesday, July 13th, and it's 3 o'clock. We're located in the Hayden City Council chambers. Roll call vote, please, Abby.
Council President Satterfield?
Yes.
Councilmember Broder?
Yes.
Councilmember Panabaker?
Yes.
And Councilmember Delane?
Yes.
We're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance prior to the council meeting, not the workshop. Is there any additions or corrections to the workshop? If not, Brett, we'll turn the time over to you.
This workshop this evening is to discuss density. I think we've been in multiple meetings as after we had approved the 2040 comprehensive plan, and we've heard some concerns in various locations about density, and so our staff made a presentation to planning and zoning, had discussion about density there, and so we've set this meeting to have a workshop with the council to discuss some of the same items and get any thoughts and comments and direction from this group. And so Melissa and Donna are, Donna left. Oh, there she is. Donna's prepared to present this concept similar to what we had at P&Z, and so this will be kind of an open, we do it in workshop format so you can ask questions and just have discussion. So.
So I printed a copy of the memo that I sent you guys with the council packets. And then I also gave you a copy of the slides that we're gonna go over tonight, places to make notes if you so choose. So just as a matter of background, the preparation for the code text amendments that went along with the last code amendments, we had about 5 workshops with planning and zoning. We had 3 joint workshops with city council. We had a public hearing in March and a public meeting with city council in April. And we received comments from local landowners, local developers, residential and non-residential developers, architects, engineers, realtors, agencies, and utility providers. In other words, we didn't do it in a black hole. The future land use map was created through many public outreach workshops, and as a result of a lot of interaction, the future land use map was created, and we created the single family zones, light industrial, mixed use, mixed residential, agricultural, commercial, and suburban. And tonight we're looking at the mixed use codes. The mixed use areas, as shown here, are pretty much along the Hutter corridor, the future Hutter corridor, areas of Hayden Avenue, and then east and west of that very, people really talked about the fact that they wanted to see that commercial corridor between Government Way and Government Way and Highway 95. So the mixed use is on either side of that, kind of as a buffer to the residential. Areas that reside within planned unit developments, existing planned unit developments, although they show up as mixed use on the future land use map, that kind of reflects what they were approved at in their PUD. Their planned unit development approvals pretty much trump. So that would be Hayden Canyon, Hayden North, and Honeysuckle Glade that's down here.
Mr. Chen?
Uh-huh.
I just want to make sure your key in the lower right, that single family yellow is R1, and then at the bottom, suburban is residential suburban. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
So the mixed use zone, as a zone designation, provides for both residential multifamily of 4 dwelling units per structure or more, and commercial land use types, creating a flexible environment for either one or the other or both to occur. So why design standards? When we had originally kind of put the code together, we were trying to let the architecture of the development community kind of figure out how to build the design that we were kind of aiming for. But that leads to not good, clear expectations of what we expect of them or what they think that they're expected to do. So design standards are to lend themselves toward consistent expectations, a consistent application, and consistency through the development process. But you don't want to build design standards to the point that you literally shrink it down into a throat that nobody can build, nobody can construct what you kind of want it to be. So we wanted to keep flexibility in that design, and we wanted to identify the fact that there were compatible uses that occurred in that mixed use area. So you were sent some slides and we're gonna kind of go through them. But while you look at the next slides, I want you to ask yourself some questions. The first thing I want you to think about when we go through these slides is, do you notice these multifamily units each time you pass them? Do you notice that they're there? Do they stand out or do they blend in? Do they create too much traffic? Do they create too much noise? And are they compatible with their surroundings? So we're gonna start our drive up Government Way, and we're gonna start from Prairie Avenue, and you're gonna drive north, and you're gonna go past the library, and then on the left-hand side of the road, you're gonna see the Matthews Apartments. The Matthews Apartments are 16.68 dwelling units per acre. They're across the street from Merritt Brothers, and they have the Paul Bunyan on the north side of their property. Okay, we're gonna keep driving north, and you'll see Hayden City Hall down here on the right. You're gonna see Sargent's on the left, and then you're gonna see the Hayden Crossing senior apartments that are all one level, back off of Sargent's Drive. Those are nearly 12 dwelling units per acre. And just barely up and across the street, not even up, but between Hayden City Hall and the parking lot to the north is the driveway into the East Country Ridge Court, and they have 13 dwelling units per acre. So we're gonna keep traveling north. We're gonna pass Zips on the right, and the next driveway past Zips to the left are the Sarah Street Apartments, also one level, and they have nearly 13 dwelling units per acre. Keep going just a little bit farther north, because here's the driveway to the Sarah Streets. Here's the new pie shop that I think is open now. And directly across the street from the pie shop is East Willow Tree Lane, and they have nearly 17 dwelling units per acre in those condos that are back there. Continuing north, going past the Blue Plate, past Dakota, you keep going north, you hit Lakeview Village Apartments, and they're at 16 dwelling units per acre. Just as an FYI, there's a playground right here in the front, and there are green space. I saw kids swinging out there last week. So that's the aerial view of all of those that we've just looked at, and the multifamily densities that are identified in each of them. So then just kind of branching off of Government Way and into local areas. This is the corner of Kathleen and 4th Street. Across the street from the fairgrounds at the roundabout, and everybody went, whoa, there's multifamily up there. Those are 36 units on 2.24 acres, which leaves you 16 units per acre. So this are the apartments that are over behind Maverick off of Ramsey Road. And is that Kathleen or?
Canfield?
Hanley, I think it's Hanley. So this is the commercial kind of in the front, apartments that blend right into their residential stock. Behind them, 294 units on 17.3 acres or 17 dwelling units per acre. And if you remove the commercial area from the front, they'd be at 19 dwelling units per acre. Just trying to give some perspective to the conversation. So this is part of those, another concept that's just over in Liberty Lake. And these are apartments that are 12 units on 0.85 acres, which leaves you with 14 units per acre. They're across the street from a park and a commercial, and this is the front of those apartments, and this is the rear. Multifamily units. So, more than one type of zone that we looked at based on size and or location and which standards should be different. I talked about the fact that in the beginning of the memo, you could kind of tell that I was kind of drafting the memo and the design standards for the workshop just as a place to start. And I gave you a whole list of places that I looked at across the country that have multifamily dwelling units, sizes comparable to the city of Hayden and a little bit larger. And some of them had mixed-use design standards or mixed-use zones that were different based on location. So I threw them out there, a mixed-use 1 and a mixed-use 2. And then I also threw out the size. Maybe the mixed-use 2s have to do with larger lots, and maybe they're adjacent to highways and freeways, like the Hutter bypass and Highway 95, and maybe the mixed-use 1s are smaller lots and in areas that aren't on arterials, or maybe they're just on arterials. I don't know, and as I finished writing the standards, honestly, I couldn't figure out how to divvy up those two zones, but I'm not saying we can't, I'm just saying I'm looking for direction.
At this point, we couldn't think what would be different between the two zones, so maybe you guys have some ideas, but we kind of liked the idea at first, and then we thought, well, what would we really make different between the two?
So
We did that.
we threw it out, it's an option, not
It's still out there.
right.
Another question, if I may. Concerning, if you've noticed other apartments, I've noticed some new apartments going on Hayden Avenue on the south side, on the west side of town. I think they're Viking. How many units per acre are those?
Are those 18 to 20,
Yeah.
something like that?
Well, you can't miss those.
Well, part of the reason that you can't miss them is because they're the first thing that got built, to be
Yeah.
fair.
I'm just
I mean-
saying, if you asked the
Right,
question, do we
no.
notice? And I'm saying,
No, I understand that,
Yes.
but that is part of the reason that they stand out is because they're the first thing that's built out
and
there.
then one more question regarding the apartments that are on Government Way here. How many of those do you know are federally subsidized rental units? Any idea?
Can't answer that question, don't know.
Thank you.
Federally subsidized, the only ones that I know are the ones at Riverstone.
Where?
Riverstone.
No,
I don't know of any here in Hayden that are federally, some have state.
Or state. actually.
Okay, but I mean, that's the only,
Yeah.
so I don't know, I just know of some federal.
I don't know. So as we were working through these design standards, we kind of were comparing them a little bit with what we would require in the central business district for design standards and which things would fall kind of out of the requirement to be looking at the design standards. So if you've already addressed the design standards previously, interior remodels would be exempt. Anything that's normal or routine maintenance would be exempt. Any construction that didn't require a building permit would be exempt. Any temporary structures would be exempt. And then wholly residential 4plexes or 5plexes with one building on one lot, we would just treat as a single site plan for that one lot, similar to what we do today. So those design goals, when we're looking at designs, we want the ground floor to create a sense of interaction with the people that are walking by it, they're walking to it, driving by it. We want to have that breakup of design so you can see where the first floor is and the second floor is. Street front facing has a clear and distinct breakup of mass, all buildings and all heights, and that we want to have the building have some cohesive architectural elements. So when I say that, I mean that when you're looking at the front of a building, fronts of buildings have really cool things. Our front of the building has, you know, the front walkway, and it has the architectural design makeup of the city hall. But as you kind of round the corner and hit the rest of the building, kind of fades off because we did a front facade and kind of a left-hand facade. What we're suggesting here is that those architectural elements that occur on the front of the building, they also need to tie into the whole building so that it doesn't have just a front, pretty front. In our design goals, we also want to create safe, friendly, and more intimate spaces. We want to have landscaping and lighting that work together. And we want to create compatible building and site design so that it works with the whole neighborhood. We don't want them to just be built just kind of inside to themselves, but that they work with everybody, and that if they have pathways, that they're lighted pathways so that you build that safe, friendly environment. We want them to, if they're near schools, we want to, and parks and services, we want to have that direct and convenient access to schools, parks, and services. And we want to create formal and informal gathering places and connections to the neighborhoods and employment areas. This can be seen here. They actually have some commercial in the ground floor, and then they have residential up above, but you've got this plaza open area in the front. And as can be seen over here, you have pathways out of the park in a variety of directions to go back out to the rest of the complex. Design requirements. So those landscaping, lighting, off-street parking and loading, sites, signs, etc., those all still need to meet city code. And those codes exist. And they have requirements for buffering, for parking areas, and for exterior buffering. We have requirements that every residential unit has to have 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit. And in multifamily complexes, you also have to provide ADA parking. We have sign codes that already address how signage can happen in the building. And then we have your normal site plans that address the amount of stormwater that you need to provide based on your parking area and what you're constructing. So all of those things would still apply, all of those codes would still apply. So then we talked about, you know, what do we really want on the ground floor? So only commercial is permitted on the ground floor of buildings fronting on an arterial. So we were looking at Hutter and Highway 95 predominantly, a residential and commercial on the ground floor fronting non-arterial and internal streets and driveways. And so what we were kind of trying to do is do that breakup again of mass and understand that we still want commercial components, and we still want the commercial components facing our Highway 95 or our Hutter areas. But in the draft that I gave you, I kind of rounded up a number that said like 10% of the gross area needed to be toward commercial. Now that number is literally plucked out of the air, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to require in the design standards a requirement for commercial that stays vacant forever, because we don't want to breed difficulties in the future. We want it to be, again, safe and friendly and work with everybody. And we truly understand that the commercial of today isn't the commercial of yesterday. So we have had some comments related to that commercial component, but maybe instead of it requiring it to be commercial, maybe we require it to be non-residential. So that if somebody wanted to include like a common open space plaza in their front, or if they wanted to include, the clubhouse portion of their project in the front. So it's still that non-residential in the front. Or maybe it's a work to live environment, so their work area is in the front, their live is someplace else. So those are all kind of options that we have heard that folks are not opposed to having that non-residential component, but they kind of would like to figure out what you guys are looking for. So that's where this slide comes in, that commercial 10%, in planning and zoning, we talked about it, 10% is not necessarily the dial number when we talked about it in planning and zoning. Somebody talked about, a certain number of footage. It's hard to do because you don't know how big these buildings are. So it's just a question mark. Don't know what that answer is. So then the other thing that we looked at was kind of a setback. So if you are on a piece of property of a multifamily building and you are on a street, then the maximum building height is 45 feet in the commercial zone, and therefore that's why it was also in the mixed use zone. And so that 45 feet allows for that 3-story structure. But we recognize that when you're a 2-story house or a single-story house adjacent to a 2-story house, there's some, concern. So we also recognize the fact that if you were a 2-story house adjacent to a 3-story multifamily structure, that might not be great. So, kind of looking at what we did similar to our accessory dwelling unit setbacks. If you are a mixed-use multifamily structure, and you are adjacent to, so your property line butts up against the property line of a mixed residential or single-family dwelling area, that you would have to set your 3-story portion of the building back. So you could still build 2 stories, meeting the 20-foot setback that's required, but you would have to set that 3-story structure back farther. And when talking to planning and zoning, they really liked option A, which is to set it back to this line here. The only reason that second option B is there is because the city of Coeur d'Alene and other neighbors that do this setback, they move it up 10 feet. Almost everybody has a starting place of up 10 feet, and then they start that line. And so we just wanted to show both. So if this was here, and that my drawing is not entirely, accurate, you'd be back 45 feet, basically. It's a 45-degree angle. You'd be back 45 feet before you could get to the 3rd story of a 3-story complex. You guys are really quiet. So then I went hunting for pictures to try to say what I was just spinning out. And it's really, really, really hard to find multifamily that is 2-story to 3-story. It's way easier to find it when it's 3- and 4-story to 6-story. Very difficult to find pictures at 2-story to 3-story, just FYI. So here you have kind of a 3-story, again, they're along a street frontage. And then this is 2-story homes with single-story garages as kind of a comparable. If you were to shove this lot, if you were to take this and shove it into this one, so you had a property line in there, then you would be more like this, where you had 2 stories and then a setback of 3 stories. That's what we're proposing. So if your lot lines are butted up against each other, we're recognizing that you should set that 3 stories back. So here's some more pictures of that 2-story, 3-story conversation, just as a comparable. And then this is another picture also. This is kind of on a hill, but kind of just shows the 2 stories, 2 stories, 3 stories. So some other design requirements that we threw in here is that if your multifamily structure, again, we require 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit for every dwelling unit that's in your multifamily portion. just like we require 2 parking spaces for every house and every condo and every townhome. Everybody has 2 parking spaces. But in no code anywhere does it require there to be garage space for those 2 parking spaces. People put garages in because we all like garages, but they're not required. And so if you don't have a garage, where do you park your bicycle or your canoe or your whatever the heck it is? And so looking through various codes out there, they had everything from 50 square feet or 50 cubic feet on up to 150 cubic feet, and I think I proposed 90 cubic feet. I was trying to get a 3 by 3 by, 10, and it's sort of trying to get to that 90 cubic feet so you could get a bicycle in it or a canoe in that space, basically some outdoor piece that you could store if a garage wasn't provided for you. So then we talk about uses within the building. So everything should be within the building or within a building on your site, unless it needs to be located outdoors due to safety or health. So maybe it's the pool, maybe you don't have an inside pool, maybe you have an outside pool. And that is specifically approved during the design review or by a conditional use permit. So mixed use zone does have some uses that are conditionally approvable uses. And so there may be some portion of the design during that conditional use request that they've requested it to be outdoors instead of inside the building. And that would all fall underneath the conditional use permit, and any additional conditions to allow for that would occur then. So all roof mounted equipment shall not be visible. That's straight right out of just about the Central Business District Code. And because the mixed use is again flanking the Central Business District, and in some cases within the Central Business District, we didn't want that to be a conflict point, so that's why that's there. And except solar equipment. I looked at a lot of code about solar equipment, and we have had requests to put solar equipment in, and so that's part of the reason that it's on there. And most of that, they have some placement that it has to generally go in order to meet the amount of sun rays for the solar equipment to function. So in other codes that we looked at, they allowed for that exception. And then property owners associations shall be required of multifamily buildings or I think in the mixed use code entirely. And what they do is they help really establish with the CCNRs and the CAMs, I just lost that word. Anyway, the community, they're for maintenance purposes basically. And they also help allocate who gets whose parking space, which I thought was really beneficial. So they address those responsibilities of who's required for what, who gets which parking places. They establish the CCNRs for maintenance, and they address those concerns. So then, common open space.
Common area maintenance is what you were looking for.
Thank you. Sorry, it's been one meeting after another today. So common open space. So those are things like playgrounds, clubhouses, recreation rooms, pools and spas, community gardens, picnic areas, gazebos, landscaped areas with paths, etc. It's pretty much any area that is utilized by everyone that's in either the complex or in that particular multifamily or multi-use building. And then private open space are fenced yards, patios, decks, and balconies. Those are those areas within the complex that are designated for a specific owner to use. And so new development of more than 5 dwelling units per structure has to show some portion of private open space. Could be a fenced yard, a patio, a deck, a balcony, some area that's outside that's designated for their use. So then let's talk about dwelling units per acre. As Melissa said previously, when we looked at densities, we looked today at what was already built in Hayden as far as densities go. And then we looked at what other densities are that are out there and what makes a successful development. Because we want these to be successful developments, and we want them to be an added benefit to our community, obviously.
But hence the presentation that you're making, because the request was, what will it look like if we reduce from 20 to another dwelling unit per acre number?
Correct.
So we wanted to show you what those look like.
So if we took the lower of the 15 to 25 number, and we were to look at that and look at that across the already built environment, we would note that there are patios and decks and balconies that are on part of those units, and that's private space. And so that's a 15 dwelling units per acre. So I used in your kind of example the 5 acre site, just to give kind of a reference. So a 5 acre site, 15 dwelling units per acre would get you less than or equal to 75 dwelling units per acre. But if you added a playground,
That's
75
not true,
dwelling units
Donna.
total, not per acre.
It
correct,
would be
that's it,
15.
75, you're correct, total, 75 total.
We moved from 20 to 75.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work. 15 dwelling units per acre, 75 total,
Oh.
maximum. But if you added a playground, common area where the kids of the complex and or their friends could go play on, we're saying that you should be able to get a density allowance to identify that and get to 16 dwelling units per acre, as an example. You could add any piece of common space, I'm just using those as examples. Then if you added 2 pieces of common space, 2 of the common areas proposed, maybe you get to 17 dwelling units per acre. And then if you added a playground and a gazebo and a clubhouse, I mean, it's all taking up space. It's all good for the common area that you're safely lined out for your residents to be able to utilize. You maybe could get to 18 dwelling units per acre. And when we presented at planning and zoning, we kind of asked them the question. In fact, Chair Peterson asked the question about what they thought about the density question. And they were not strongly opposed to that 20 number that we had run up the flagpole before. Although they were kind of looked at this, they wanted to go through the workshop. And by the time the workshop was over, they liked the idea of adding amenities to increase the density. So they thought this was a good plan. Again, in all cases, all other design standards shall be required. Traffic studies and sewer studies would be required based on the proposed number of units. That's not different, that's what's in the code today.
And we've had instances where multifamily due to density, due to traffic or sewer, was not approved.
Correct.
So, I mean, it's no different than what we've
Right, and
tried
that's
to
in
do
the code
previously.
now.
Right. So then based on conversations with planning and zoning, they talked about the fact that when they drive up Government Way, they don't notice any of the multifamily that we just talked about. Part of them didn't know the Matthews apartments were there. We heard that. And part of them didn't realize that there was these apartments back here. They knew they were back here, but they didn't realize how many were back there. And so we heard that several times over. So as a result of that, I kind of threw in this other design requirement. And I said that if the site is a secondary lot, meaning it's really set back behind, it only has like 50 feet of frontage on the road, which is pretty much Country Ridge Court up here. Or if the residential component of the mixed use property is 150 feet back away from the road that it faces, and a type 1 landscape perimeter buffer is used. So, and you get these trees that literally grow together, but it would be required on all 4 sides instead of they only have it on 2 sides. If those were both applied, then maybe we just add an additional 2 units per acre without requiring any additional amenities. However, should a property come forward and they wanna do kind of a combination of both, I don't know. Maybe we say yes and maybe we say no. I don't know, I'm throwing that out. This is a clubhouse right here for these units. So then maybe they get to 18 dwelling units per acre. Or maybe you go back up to that 20, but you have to get there by doing the design to get you there. I don't know, I'm just throwing it out, it's something to ponder. Properties within the mixed use zone and the central business district, or the mixed use zone and a neighborhood commercial zone, all of the requirements of the central business district and or the neighborhood commercial node would also apply. So it's not like, oh, we'll do this, we don't have to do that. No. You have to meet all of the requirements or it doesn't go through. So then we would treat these reviews, these design reviews, concurrently with the application, similar to what we do with the architectural design review that we do in the central business district today. We'd apply the standards of approval, so the proposal would have to incorporate all of the design requirements. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposal addresses each of the design criteria that are listed kind of there for you and that we can tweak like crazy if you want. And then that written decision will become a part of the permit. And should they not like our written decision, they have the opportunity to appeal that to City Council. Now I'm looking for directions.
We're just questions, comments, talk things through.
Well, this was spurred by Councilmember Delaney's question of what would it look like if we moved back from a density standpoint. So I guess I'll start with Councilmember Delaney. Does this help in terms of your concerns? Does this, I mean, a lot of work was done based on, I thought, your very appropriate request. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Donna, first off, I appreciate your analysis on this. You did a very good job. But after going through it, for me personally, I'm strongly opposed to the high densities. And so I do think you make a good point that in some areas of Hayden, you don't notice these, this 16 unit and 17 unit, is that correct? Is 17 units, the highest?
I think so.
Those condos of the street. Yeah, so I guess Matthew's the highest.
I do agree that in certain locations of Hayden, that they are, the way they're located, they have, less of an impact. But with all of the growth that's occurring, I would like to see less growth rather than to make exceptions to allow for more growth. I would prefer 12 units per acre as, which we had in the 2008 plan. In some cases, I think it might be appropriate in certain circumstances to maybe go up to 15. I'd be hesitant to go to 16 or 17, but if they met certain specifications, and depending upon the location, I could definitely see 15 units per acre.
Do you have an idea of where you're thinking about location-wise? Maybe that's part of the MU2 versus MU1 conversation.
In the purple areas of the map.
So I'm just trying to So if you were looking at the map, are you looking at like, along the highway frontages? Are you thinking about along the arterials? Just trying to kind of figure out where you're
Okay,
talking so that we can kind of figure out how to make that work, I guess, that's my question.
yes, and can you show me where the central business district?
It runs from about Dakota, along Government Way south to about there. So from about, let's see, that's miles, so where's Dakota? Oh, Dakota, from Dakota to about there.
Okay,
And it's one lot deep, either side of Government Way.
okay. For the most part, and, I would prefer the higher density of, say, 15, in the purple areas.
But in all of the purple areas,
Cause that's where we,
'Cause
that's
that's
the
where it's
only
now.
spot we allowed is in the purple areas.
yeah, so all the purple is currently mixed use, and under the current code, that's, all the purple is the 20 units an acre. So if we change it, I think the question for staff is, do we do like a mixed use 1, mixed use 2? Where we allow a lower in some spots of the mixed use and then a higher in others, and if so, where would we do that? Cause as of now, all of the purple's
They're-
mixed use,
Yeah,
so-
apartments aren't really allowed in anywhere but purple unless you're in the central business district, then it can also be in the commercial, but that's a whole nother discussion, cause it has to be like a mixed use building and everything.
That's limited by the commercial business district.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, Councilmember Delang, is if it's purple, did you have an idea of where in purple, if you wanted to see 15 units an acre, where that would be on the map? That's what Donna was asking clarification, is it along maybe the highway corridors? Or those larger streets?
I think it would depend upon too, what is currently there, like if it's, if there's a lot of residential already, then, I would prefer not to see 15 in certain locations, like a lower number. Maybe the 12.
So that to me, just me, and I'm not a planner, but that's probably right, just in the areas that are only, like up the top northwestern quadrant there, how it's only orange, and there's no other R1 around it, maybe right there. Same thing on the, well, we're still in the northwest, but right there to the left of the airport, Donna, on the other side of the Hutter, where it's just orange, not yellow. Right there, Councilmember Delang, cause there's no R1, okay, maybe those locations.
Well, it might be in here too,
Yeah,
right here.
I was just trying to think of areas, if the concern was being close to R1, where we weren't where we hadn't considered R1.
Something to
Just an
consider
idea.
on a bigger scale, I'm sorry, Jerry, that this-
No, go ahead.
if you- is that the closer we get to Government Way, the more dense, the more traffic, the more issues arise. When the council deliberated and voted against the property north of Maverick, the issue is density, traffic. So it's the same type of thing, the more we go to downtown, the more we look at those areas, the worse, it's already bad. So maybe that, and I'm not putting words in Councilmember Delang's mouth, but maybe that's more of an issue or concern, as you and I talked, was, yes, it has to be in the purple, but it shouldn't be in the downtown area or as much. Is that what you were, cause you and I were talking at the conference about that?
Yes.
Okay, and I didn't mean. So maybe it's all along that, it can be west of, is that Atlas? Or Hutter?
This is Hutter.
That's
Hutter,
Hutter.
so Hutter. So maybe west of Hutter makes more sense, north of Lancaster, something that doesn't cause continued bottlenecks traffic-wise, and we have sewer issues as well. So at least it can give a blueprint or a framework that says, okay, we're not advocating this at all, and it will be limited to certain areas and make that limit even greater. I don't know, I just was trying to formalize and conceptualize what your concerns were.
I do think that, in areas where we, like the central business district, where we have, at peak times of the day, we have a lot of traffic congestion. So, maybe less, in those areas.
P and Z did not have, it's okay, Donna, to share. P and Z had no concerns geographically with respect to any of this, with respect to this map.
I
So,
think they liked the mixed use 1 and 2,
Mhm.
but then
Really,
but then
really
we didn't get any of additional guidance, so that's kinda where we're left open.
and
So
mixed
if you
use
guys
is
have
different
ideas-
than, I mean, we're talking about different things. Mixed use in my mind, from a commercial element, is different than without a commercial element to it.
Well, you've gotta just think about what's allowed in mixed use. So
I
it can
know,
be
I'm-
commercial, it can be multifamily, or it can be a combination of the two.
Correct.
And in the central business district, the way we wrote it is that it has to be a combination of the two. You
Correct.
it can't be downtown where we're trying to have a vibrant downtown and not have a commercial component to your multifamily development. So we decided, we had decided that before, that made sense in the downtown.
It wasn't brought to mind, when I read it and saw it, it made much more sense. I mean, the concern was, so
But it
right
doesn't make
now,
sense
there's an
everywhere.
additional constraint, is that any multifamily must have a commercial appendage to it, correct?
In the central business
In the
district.
central business district.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know.
It doesn't have to be like a mixed use building, you can have separate buildings on one site. So they might do office space in the front, or some retail, something in the front and multifamily in the rear, or we've seen different ideas thrown around. Unless you're like fairly urban, the mixed use buildings, what Donna and I hear all the time is that they just don't really make sense.
I don't know
Unless
that
you're
they make any more
pretty
sense than
urban
Hayden.
and you're going higher, right? So with our, cap on height, they just really can't, they just don't really make a lot of sense.
Well, we'll let Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls do that.
Hmm?
We'll let Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls do that.
Yeah, because we just don't have that's just not really the character of Hayden to have that kind of height, so.
Right. So I was trying to help Jerry, are there recommendations that you have, or any other member of the council? This is a discussion time.
Because the city is, limited on funding to, like for transportation, for roads, and we already have issues with traffic. For me, I'd like to see density limited to, for the most part, at 12 units per acre, but then in certain areas, where there isn't, where there aren't a lot of residential units, in those areas, possibly raising the maximum, or putting a cap at 15 units per acre. And that would be a way of controlling growth for the city. And, it's some point in, in the future, if, we get, areas of the city taken care of, where traffic flow is better, and, if there was a need for greater density, which I can't see right now, I think that's a huge issue. I would just like to see more of a controlled rate of growth.
So just to be clear, they were proposing like an M1 or M2, whatever you wanna call it, like mixed use 1 and mixed use 2 with different density allowances, and you're suggesting that with, like maybe around the, downtown business area at 12, and then the other purple area at 15. Is that, just to clarify that?
Donna, have you ever had a request to, with any of these higher density complexes, to put the playground, park, activity area on the roof?
No.
Okay, I was just curious about that. Yeah, and I think that the examples you've shown us are a testimony to the fact that higher density can work, because it worked just fine up until we start getting this latest influx of people and traffic. So my thinking is, along with Jerry's thinking, is the fact that, to put a 100 unit apartment complex across the street here in Government Way is not a good idea. We gotta have enough problems here, but where you guys have designated where there's gonna be more thoroughfares, more roads, it's more undeveloped, open property that allows us to require of the developer some things that need to be put in there to help alleviate a lot of that traffic. I still will maintain that our traffic we see here on Government Way is not because of the apartment complexes and things like that. It's people that live outside the city that are using our roadways. Because who wants to use Highway 95? So they drift around. I mean, Dalton Gardens has the same problem with 4th Street. People don't want to use certain other roadways, but that's another issue. Didn't mean to get off on that, but I like the fact that where the higher density does work, maybe it could be lowered a little bit, 15 or so, 16, something like that from 20. But I think it's location, location, location.
Any other comments? This is a good time to discuss. Yeah.
So what we'd like to do is get direction, just so we can move forward in some manner. The staff's getting requests, and so if you want to modify this, then we would look at taking it back around and doing a code amendment to modify that, as opposed to trying to change everything. Modify it, come up with like an M1 and M2 with different densities, and take it through that process, or you can stay where we're at, but we just really would like to get some direction so we can get off of where we're at.
Code amendment process will be a public hearing, start at planning and zoning, and then we come before you, noticing requirements, things like that. I think you're just looking for direction on being able to finalize some of those.
So this is just a question. why do you need direction? Why don't we just look at a project I mean, at some level, this discussion will become much more, real if there's requests. I mean, so to get direction that's hypothetical, when there's other issues involved with each project, I don't know that, I mean, I'd love if council wants to do that, great. But I don't know that, I mean, we've been dwelling on this from a directional standpoint. We have something that's been approved by council. And as we look at projects like we've always done, we need to, in my mind, be able to look at projects and identify whether or not that project makes sense or doesn't make sense, with lots of different caveats. Is it in a location that won't cause further traffic issues? Is it in a location that won't cause sewer issues? Is it in a location that won't cause other things? I mean, I don't, and it's just a question. It's not I am not a member of council other than for ties. So, but we've done this isn't our first rodeo with this, and it's like direction, and we've had others, and I'd like both council members to my left make comments, whether we've heard those comments before or not. I mean, Councilmember Delane wanted to know what the effect would be if we reduced the units per acre. And you did a superb job in identifying that and trying to figure out direction, but I don't know that direction now, it's hypothetical, it's who knows all the things that are going on. We might not have sewer for any of them. We might not have traffic for any of them. There might be, who knows? And so I think there's a framework in my mind, and I mean, I've been wrong a lot, so I could be wrong in this regard too.
Right, planning is purely a legislative process for the city, you know, we go through the statutory requirements of updating our comprehensive plan, and with that, you know, code amendments followed, just given that we had 2 new zones created and we removed a zone, so then we created code, you know, for those 2 new zones. On the kind of why now, I think only because we had heard concerns from council and the community over growth and the densities, and we just kind of are high-centered right now on moving forward with some things in our comp plan. We've talked before about, I think I brought up at our last meeting, both Melissa and I did, on we need some direction with moving forward with the comp plan and the zone change. Whether or not that's, we change only those currently zoned multifamily, since that zone no longer exists, so we need code to apply them to something. Or we do the city initiated process on a broader net of properties. But we need to make those decisions. Staff needs to know what to do. They're in limbo, and this is their job every day that they do, so they need some direction certainly on how to move forward with that. We have code, it's valid today. We could get a request to, I mean, no property is zoned this, so they could go through a zone amendment to rezone their property, get it rezoned to mixed use, and then come in with a development that's maybe 20 units an acre, maybe it's 16. I don't know, you're right, it is all hypothetical. But this is just one method of something we could do. If the concern was on what our code was, we could do to mitigate that. We could require other design criteria. We could do the mixed use 1, mixed use 2. So in certain areas of the city, we like the idea of mixed use, but maybe there were other areas of the city where a density was better than others. So that's, I guess, you know, just the reason for the workshop is we need direction on moving forward.
Any other discussion or questions by any member of the council?
I'd just like to make one comment.
Sure. This is your turn.
Over all the years that we've been doing this, I think that, this question, I never thought of it that way before. Do you drive by these places and do you notice them? Are they obscene to you? Is there something that looks bad? Is it junk or is it not or whatever? It looks to me like an extremely large amount of thought and planning and common sense went into a lot of this stuff that's here today. And the only thing that's causing a problem, not the ones that are existing here by any means, because they're done and their density is what it is and all that, some of them you don't even pay any attention to. But we don't want a bunch of you look around the county out here and you see some of this stuff growing up like weeds all over the prairie out there. I don't think any of us wanna see that. So I think that we have to use a little common sense about it. On the other hand, there is a point that, and we're not in the business of protecting developers, but this stuff has to pencil out or nobody's gonna do anything. And so if you get the density down to a single family residence almost, it just drives the cost up to where nobody can afford to do it. So I think what we need here mostly is common sense. It looks like we've had it in the past to a great degree around here with some of the stuff that's been done. I think we need to look at this very carefully. I don't think what Matt mentioned out here, these ones out here, that hits you like that when you drive by there. There's all kinds of problems involved with that kind of stuff too. One of them, we just got a letter today, police protection. You know, so we've gotta use our heads and look at the future and do what we need to do and do it very carefully so that we can make it work and so it's successful. That's all.
Well, on the, just bringing it up, on the reaction from planning and zoning to Donna's question, Donna started off the same way, planning and zoning, about taking the trip down Government Way. And planning and zoning, I recall, had some thought into, oh yeah, you don't ever notice those, or why don't you? And I recall the consensus being the setback, well, and the
Right.
trees, right, they're 30 older,
Well, that's why
older
we
trees,
did
but.
like that you have to set back further if you want a 3-story, and that kind of stuff's not in the code today.
It's
So
not in
that's
the
why we're trying to make the code just a little bit better.
To require more of those design.
Right, we're trying to do
Yeah.
what we thought you guys were looking for.
And setback was a big thing with planning and zoning, or at least what they came to of why don't I notice these?
And a lot of it had to do with how far away from the road they were and stuff.
Well, if you look at this one up here behind Capone's, it's going up right now. If you look back at years ago, is that where you really would have wanted something like that built, the city of Hayden? No, probably not. But look what it replaced. It replaced a slum area with little trailer houses that are junk and all that, so it was a step in the right direction. Probably otherwise that thing wouldn't have been built there.
I mean, I think though, I mean, if you have people that live there next to restaurants and they walk down to go to restaurants
Sure.
and stuff like that, I mean, that helps to create that, I mean, all the, like, even way in the past, planning documents for the downtown core, we're trying to create a walkable
Yes,
core,
that's
so
right.
those, you know, the people living pretty close, and it's only a 2-story apartment buildings there next to Capone's.
Yeah.
Those people will start to walk to the pie shop and Capone's and the coffee shops and that kind of thing.
Well, one thing that people, I think of when they look at those, they think of low income. That's the first thing, and it's not necessarily the case, because there are a lot of people that are retired, that just don't wanna take care of
Right.
yards, and they wanna be able to walk and you have something to eat, they don't wanna put up with all that, so there's a whole lot of different people that are involved in this.
Right.
Councilmember Roder, any comments?
Donna, could you go back to your third slide, which is the one that shows the acreage of the different zones? Well, that wasn't helpful, was it? There it is, yeah. Thank you. All right, as I look at that breakdown of the acreage and the percentage, what really hits me is that we have 1% of our acreage in the city that's residential suburban. And to me, there's been no talk about our future with putting that type of zone in place. Everything's higher density. And where my perspective is coming from, when I look at that, is I look at our comprehensive plan and said we're supposed to have a mix of zones. Well, we haven't planned any more increase in residential suburban. And think we're missing the boat with our comprehensive plan. If we're to follow and have a mixture of zoning, we should have some residential suburban in our mix. I think that should be changed. Now, my perspective, it'll relate to the discussion on the density question today on M1 or M2. But I talked to a lot of folks in the town, and they hate the traffic. They hate more people moving here, and they hate the price of homes, where it's going. It's forcing people out. I mean, people that have been here a long time, they're looking at if they can move out of here, they will. And they're saying, well, where can we go? But they know they can sell their house for probably 8 or 9 times what they paid for it 20 years ago. To me, the question is, how big do we want the population of Hayden to be in 20 years or 10 years? And this all relates to the zoning application into what kind of growth we have. And I know that Glenn Miles, who has used data from the US Census Department with calculations from other sources, is saying, well, we can anticipate 36,000 people in 20 years from now. I don't want to see that many people in the city of Hayden. Is there anything wrong with that? Do I want to see our city double in size? And again, how are we going to pay for the road improvements to handle that type of growth in traffic? I don't know how that's going to happen. So I guess my question is, what is wrong with the community to say, well, why don't we look at 4,000 people growth in 20 years? I mean, we have the right as a city, the citizens to go to put a plan together that what would they like their city to look like in 20 years. And of course, that's what the comprehensive plan is doing, but it's looking at this target of over doubling our population. So my point is relating to density, and I want to see a much lower density plan for the future. Now, I can't tell you where that's at, but I'll start right now and say, we're missing the boat on residential suburban. We have not blended any more of that into our city. That I know there's an economic question about it, but there's some pretty nice homes being built. 2 homes or on 1 home on an acre, because that allows 2 homes per an acre. And it's a market issue. There are people moving here that have, I think Ed identified the average budget through the county. I think he heard it. He said it was like $750,000 is what they have to spend on a house. So there's money that can be spent on that type of structure. Do we have a requirement as a city, and this is a question, to provide housing opportunities for all types of people? Well, what's the cost of that? Who pays for the infrastructure to accommodate all those different types of residential units, meaning 20 units per acre or whatever? Why? Again, I'm going to go back to talking to people. They don't want to see more and more people move here. They don't want more and more traffic, and they don't want their taxes to go up to pay for the growth. So we're planning for this tremendous growth, and I'm opposed to that goal that's set forth to where we either plan or accommodate, whatever term you want to use, that type of population growth. I want to shoot at a much smaller, lower target. And I'll use the example of adult gardens. We're not adult gardens, I know that. They're more of a country club type of place because they've said, 1 acre per house, and that's the way they want it. But you know what? They had the right to set what they wanted their community to look like over time. And they've done that. So what is wrong with the people of Hayden saying, we want a much slower growth, we want less density, and which is not stopping growth, but let's not accelerate it by these zoning changes that will give us doubling our population. I mean, so let's ask, I know one of the questions here, and I want to go back to the question that Donna had placed here about these existing multifamily units. Do they create too much traffic? Well, how do you evaluate that? But I can tell you this, 2 houses per acre is gonna produce a lot less traffic than 20 units per acre. And that's what we're looking at, is how much do we wanna densify Hayden? And of course, that's up to the city council on where they wanna go with this, but I'm just telling you, my position is, I don't wanna go to this high density. And that's my,
Can I say something, please?
Sure, I guess it's everybody, so, yes.
Years ago, that subject came up, 30 years ago or more. And we sat in this room and we decided, what did we want the future of Hayden to be? And you've heard me say this before. What we wanted it to be is a place where our grandkids and our children could ride their bikes to Honeysuckle Beach, and we had parks and we had ball fields and all that for the kids. Years have gone by, things have changed now. We could cut the density back, we could do all that. The problem is that it limits very big time the kind of people that will be able to afford to live here. It will not be our children or our grandchildren or people with jobs. It will be people that have millions of dollars to spend on homes. They can afford the infrastructure, they can afford to pay the kind of money that some of these lots are going for now. And that would do exactly what you're talking about. That would limit the growth, that would bring the traffic down, and that would make it affordable, but not for us. Not for the people that have lived here, not for the children, not for the grandchildren, or the people that have low incomes and stuff like that. It would be limited to people who can afford to do it. And that's what Dalton Gardens is today. I remember when Dalton Gardens went to 1,500 an acre, how smart I was. Who the hell is gonna pay 1,500 an acre for that property? Well, look at it. And you don't find too many entry-level people buying homes out there to start because they can't do it. And we could, if we did the same thing, if we made it like that, then we would not have the multifamily, we would not have all that kind of stuff, because the stuff that we would be doing here would not be affordable to the kind of people that we set this up for to begin with. So that's where we are. What do you want? Who do you want to live here? That's what it amounts to.
and I appreciate Council Member Anna Baker's comments. I think those are good comments to consider, but you still have to ask the question, how are we going to pay for this kind of growth? I mean, look what we're getting from Sheriff. He wants 1.18 million in addition to the 400 that we already pay him. That's 2.2. That means 12 more deputies. How are we gonna pay for all this growth? And until I get what I feel like is a good answer to how we're gonna solve these congestion problems on the roads and our infrastructure problems, I don't want more density. And I think that it would be important to address that question, is how do you pay for it? I mean, we have the comprehensive plan was a lot of hours and a lot of dedication and really well done, but one element I like to know is, how do we pay for that?
Matt, let me throw something in, going back 20, 30 years. We have asked the state of Idaho, because a lot of the decisions that have to be made here so that we can afford to do what you're talking about, like our levy rate, like the money that we have for police protection and kind of stuff like that, we have to have the state of Idaho help us to make those decisions, because we don't have the power to do it on our own. And we, to this point in time, we have not gotten any help from the state of Idaho out of any of this kind of stuff. We have gone out for a levy rate increase. Well, we know what the levy rate is. That's not a secret. It is not fair. It was done for the right reason, and I'm part of the problem there. But we've outgrown that. We have to step up, and we have to get more money in order to afford these things. The state says put it out to a vote of the public. Okay, you put it out to a vote of the public today, and you know what they're gonna tell you? To go to hell. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. I'm not sure that property taxes are the fair way to do this anyway. So the police protection thing a few years ago, this has been done numerous times to get more money for police protection. The people didn't support us and vote to support that. So how do we force them to do it? And this is something you've probably been around a lot more than I have. I have yet to see one of our elected officials from Boise, from our legislators or anybody in here trying to help us with any of these problems in the years that I've been here. There was only one guy that came in here, and that was Doug O, when he was right after he got elected. Have you seen anybody hanging around here asking to help? I haven't, and they should be, because this is important to all of us that live here. And there is a fair way to do this, but we need the help of the state to do it, and we don't get it.
And I'd like to add to that, because I think that Dick is correct. In fact, the legislature passed, and I think went into effect July 1, where our new construction was reduced by 20%. So basically, the attitude of the legislature is we as cities are wasting money. So we're gonna cut you back. So we're not gonna get any help from the state, is my point.
Yeah.
So again, so let's just put that aside, so we're not getting any help from the state. How do we pay for our plan? Still back to that.
Yeah, maybe, I have to try to answer that, and I don't have the perfect answer, but when I hear this discussion, as far as density, and I'm not an advocate for high density, and when you talk about density, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder a little bit too. From where we were in California or whatever, a high density is a lot higher than what we're looking at here. And so when you look at, say, Hayden Canyon, which is a big chunk of what we're talking about, the density there is close to suburban. It's 2.5. If you look at, I think the Marks annexation, isn't the average is 2, which is suburban. So we're getting, some of our future developments are in that range of suburban, and so you have some of the developers that are saying, okay, we want to be in that market, but we need to know, the Marks annexation and some of those houses, as Dick brought up, they're gonna be outside the realm of what the average working person can afford. And so, and it gets to what you mentioned, what do we want as a community? And when I've looked at planning things, they talk about a healthy community includes all types of housing. Doesn't necessarily mention what percentage or whatever, but it talks about having some kind of housing opportunities for everyone, so you're not foreclosing the ability for, your kids to be able to come back and work and be here. I think additionally, we should consider, we completely surround the airport, and I bring this up all the time. So we basically have this whole area that's the city of Hayden. We can't plan for the other areas, but if you take the density of that entire area with what we have there, our density is gonna be really low. You've got a lot of low density all the way around the airport where it might be some light industrial, or it's just gonna be open fields, because they're trying to buy up what they can. That's a big chunk of what our city is, and so you already, I think that's a factor to consider. Now
But
back,
how does that help funding?
so back to your question as far as funding. When you look at or listen to Bob Norris, his comments were, that number he gave is what we should be paying now. So if we had, no growth, he's asking for the existing citizens to pay that additional amount. If we add folks, at least on the police side, it helps disperse, the amount that we'd have to pay for those officers. It would also increase the number that we would need. On the sewer side, I think we've mentioned, we've got a plan in place to figure out how to have developers pay for their portion of the expansion. And we've got a plan in place for using the capitalization fees to pay back if they front some of this infrastructure. So we've been working on the sewer plan for a while, and I feel like we're gonna be able to solve the sewer issue. The biggest issue that we face, that I don't have the best answer for, is traffic. We've got almost 3 million now in impact fees. We've got, we're hoping that we can use some of the ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan money, for, say, Ramsey Road. As developers come in, you see it along Hayden, we've required them to give right of way to expand, so we're getting some of the right of way there and put the road in. And so our targets are some of these intersections that are bad with the money that we have. We use the impact fee money to try to solve some of these issues. I'll tell you, when you look at the CIP, there's not enough money, but you have to think about it, you know, that's long-term. All of those projects don't need to be done immediately, some of them do. And so we're trying to target them. So we do have some funds that are coming in from growth that we're using to target some of these intersections and some of these roads. We've got HURA for the downtown area that I've advocated, you've advocated. Let's use those funds for infrastructure, and I think it's a smart approach. We've got several $1 million. Let's use that money to try to fix the problems on Government Way. And so that's the strategy we have. I don't have the magic bullet. Traffic is the issue. And those are the ways we can hit some of the hot spots. If we didn't have any growth, we still have existing problems with traffic that existing taxpayers, we'd have to figure out together how we pay for that. So that's, I guess, the best answer I have for that, being a little bit long-winded.
These last few weeks, I've done a lot of analysis, because that's what I do. Hope is not a very good strategy. And I've come to the conclusion that we aren't paying for it. So when you say, how can we pay for it? Not only
I mean, growth is not paid for.
correct, not even
Yeah.
close. And I say not even close, it seems to be getting worse and worse because our hole's getting bigger and bigger. Our capital improvement plan is, I go by those intersections and I think, can they wait 2 years? No, and yet they're 5 years down the road or 6 years down the road. And so part of me, from a pure financial standpoint, and this is, I don't mean to cause heresy, but is that anything purple that's within the corridor along Government Way or along, is that Honeysuckle? I'm sorry, Donna.
Hayden.
That's Hayden.
Yeah.
Hayden, that's what I meant, thank you. Just for a while, unless it makes real sense from a commercial standpoint, unless there's a commercial piece to it, I don't know how it'll ever fit, and I don't know how we could pay for that. Cause we can't pay for what exists. So just a minute, Dick, and I'll let you, so then I looked at, okay, so let's say that all of our growth in the next 2 years is residential. R1 or S1, because, and there's a difference, but because S1s are gonna be far more expensive anyway, so the property tax levels will be higher, but they're still working on a levy rate that's smaller, and that makes it more difficult. What that will do is we could catch up a little bit, but we still have the county portion sitting right there that's using all of our roads, and it will cause our homes, because we can't build them fast enough for demand. If we're mad about what our values are for homes right now, I'm scared to death what they're gonna be in 3 years, because demand right now far exceeds supply. So if we think responsible growth that could help us a little bit, but even no growth, we're gonna have our values of single family homes. It's just me, and I'm just a finance guy, and I've talked to a lot of experts. It's gonna get worse. Our values are gonna go higher no matter what. And so the answer to we can't pay for growth now, whether we use multifamily or mixed use, unless that mixed use has a high level of commercial and a higher value of cost per unit. It's gonna be difficult for us to even get ahead of the game. And so that's why my thought is that we gotta look at in my mind, project by project, code by code, area by area. And as a council, we need to be able to identify, okay, this can make sense, because we are a small town feel, family-friendly city that's not a small town feel and not family-friendly anymore.
I mean, that's kind of where I am, as I look at my vision and what we've done. I'm saddened. The deal tonight is sad. Other deals of where we've been with open property, it's just sad. It still can be done and it needs to be done and it's the right thing. That we're not a small town anymore, and Councilman Roder, I agree. I don't know how to pay for, and I don't see us being able to pay for growth. Multifamily, mixed use has to have the big commercial element to it. The answer to me is getting more commercial development here.
Agree?
Yeah, and to use our north quadrant and to almost eliminate any purple unless it has something to do with a balance. Because there's no other way in my mind that we can afford what we need to do just to run our city. Sorry, I thought McCambridge would be a thought.
Years ago, in the early '80s, when the recession was going on, a friend of mine thought I would make a good real estate salesman, so I took the course and I passed it and all that, and I went to work for Century 21. And I hated it, but that was just me. At the time, homes out here at Emerald Estates, you could list 6 of them a day, and you couldn't sell one to save your life, and they were in the $70,000 range at that time. You can imagine what those houses are worth today. Okay, I listed some property for a guy who came from Escondido, California. Ed might have the answer to this, I don't know.
San Diego.
And he told me, he said, this place is heaven.
East of San Diego, hot. But
Yeah. He was a developer in Escondido. I remember his name, I'm not gonna say it. But a good guy. And he told me, he said, do you know on a bare lot in Escondido, California in 1983, what the fees and the costs are before you even turn a shovel full of dirt on that property? $40,000. We're not anywhere near close to that today. You know, 30 years later, 40 years later, we're still I don't know what the costs are there by the time you pay for everything, but they're not $40,000. And he said, this place is heaven, and it is, and it has been. And you're right, I don't know how we're gonna pay for all this stuff because I don't know what California did down there to allow those people, and it drove people out, it didn't work 100% right either, but they had a mechanism somehow that allowed them to collect what was necessary to take care of business down there at that time, and we don't have that mechanism. We don't have it here. We don't have, we can't do anything about our levy rate because we have to put it out to the people that don't wanna pay for it. The same ones with the sheriff, the deal we wanted to go out, it was a minimal amount of money. The sheriff's, our contract with the sheriff has saved our taxpayers out here millions of dollars over the years. They don't appreciate it, they don't care. They don't even think about it, you know? But we've come to the point now where we cannot squeeze enough out of anything to make this work unless we get some cooperation from the state or something. We were talking about here, and I'm sorry to take up the time, but this stuff has bothered me for years, and it's just heartbreaking that we can't fix what should be easy to fix. If people would just take care of their own damn place where they live, but they don't. They don't want to pay for anything, they just want it. I think, what if we had a local option taxing authority? Just throw one out, which is something to think about. What if the state said, okay, Kootenai County, and in the first place, in Boise, they think we're too stupid to run our own business anyway, so they won't give you any help in doing anything. That's the truth. I've been through it for 30-some years. I've seen it happen over and over again. But what if we had local option taxing authority and say it was only, it's just throwing stuff out, a half a cent a gallon on gas, or something that would raise money for a designated use such as road, street repair, which we're falling further behind on all the time, every year. We've been doing it for years. We know that, it comes up all the time. And law enforcement. Because if we're faced today, we got a letter today that they're cutting off our contract with the county for sheriff's protection, which was a bargain, and we've known it's been a bargain. We know we need to pay our share, but we don't have the money. If we were to go out today and start our own police department, I bet it'd be a minimum of $3 million to even get started. Where's that gonna come from? I don't know. We did this to save our people money years ago, and it was a system that worked, and it seems like nobody really cares, you know? I don't understand that at all. I'm sorry, that's how I feel. Yeah.
I don't know what else, I mean,
Well, we're just listening and throwing out ideas, trying to, with what we're hearing, I mean, and Donna is in the trenches and she would know this better. I just threw out the idea of what about a base amount of density in the mixed use, anything above that, then they have to come for like a special use permit.
but have them look at per project, I mean,
That would make it a project by project,
Yeah.
but,
then we can look at it and say, okay, if in fact we're gonna buy, cause we're trying to divide the baby without having the babies. Or another analogy I use with the airport, we're trying to decide who our grandchildren are gonna marry.
So what I heard was
And, go ahead.
that they have a kind of a base of 12 and they feel good about 15. So instead of starting at 15 down here, I'm trying to figure out a mechanism to get there. So if it's a project by project that meets the criteria that we've kind of laid out here with landscaping and setting them back and having amenities and they've addressed their sewer technical memo, so they have sewer, and they've addressed their traffic mitigation because they're addressing traffic mitigation issues, and they're addressing all of those comments. If they go above that 15, 16 number, whatever that is, that peak number, then they would come forward with a special use permit, or that's what you suggested. Special use permits go to
That's okay. I think
planning
that's
and
good.
zoning. They go to planning and zoning for approval. They wouldn't come to city council for approval.
Right, but project by project has, we have to look at it anyway, and I understand it, but I don't know that we could whitewash with direction when there's philosophical issues and economic issues that are in play here, and social issues that are in play, that are significant, you know, at a lot of levels, and I don't know if only R1's the right answer. In fact, I don't believe it is, economically. I've done enough research, but it also, the pendulum has to be, we have to figure out how to make it work as best as we can. Timing's important, geography is important, where it sits is important. So this is just, it was brought up, the multifamily that's on Hayden, outside, that's a Viking, yes, we could see it, but it's not that, I don't know that I want 20 of them, or 2, but I mean, if we're gonna do it, that's a great place to do it. And it fits a model and it's outside of our range, but at least project by project to look at it and identify, does it make sense? Is it harming our citizens? Is it gonna cause us to have to pay $2 million 8 years from now that we won't have for roads, for sewer, so it is a crystal ballish type situation.
So I do wanna also point out, and I know that you guys are all aware, but we look at this and we get all lost and see purple. All of this area north of Lancaster, Powell and Cutter, is not currently in the city limits. So
I
we're
wasn't
talking
worried
about
that.
growth and council member Panabaker has brought up many times that we're got a map that's driving growth. That's not it. This map was created based on input from the citizens as to where they wanted to see growth, not as a roadmap to get us to some number in the future.
That's an important part. You might wanna repeat that,
been
because that's
part of-
really important, because that's philosophically where we have crossed
Right,
roads.
so,
We're not trying to create a blueprint as to where we can accommodate or enhance or entice growth. So please, that's a great point.
so what I was trying to say is that all of this area is outside of the heavy black line is in area that is, north of town, is in our area of, city impact. And it's anticipated at some point in the future to annex in, and at that time, that's when their zone designation will be established. But none of that area is currently annexed. This area that's out here west of what is proposed to be the Hutter bypass at some point in the future, is also not in the city limits today. And it has a whole long process it has to go through to get to the city limits, and a whole long process to get infrastructure to that area. So it's not gonna happen overnight. It's probably not gonna happen in the next couple of years, or probably way past that. But anyway, it's out there. Anyway, that's in the shared tier. And Rathdrum, folks, is right there. So.
For now.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to bring that forward, that this is a map that the citizens talked about. We worked really hard listening to their comments as a staff and as a council and a planning and zoning commission about where they wanted to see growth. So we recognize the fact that the growth needs to have transportation corridors that work. It needs to have a sewer infrastructure that works. I mean, folks that are down here in this neck of the woods, they're gonna have to put a lift station in and get some sewer there. They don't have a way to get to sewer, so
And Donna, that goes
they're
back
not
to
gonna
the
build
project.
tomorrow either, so.
And maybe we you can use this as a blueprint, but it's project by project, you know, activity by activity as best as you can. I know that ties hands a little bit, but you have some level of, I don't know, again,
Can I ask a question about
please,
that?
please.
When you, project by project, legal, it's a legal thing. You just, if you're making rules that control people, you pretty near have to control everybody the same. The rules have to be the same for everyone, so if you take a project and you say, well, this person has a lot more money, we're gonna charge them this and that ain't gonna pack it. Now, so that, you get into trouble there too.
I didn't mean that.
I know you didn't.
What I meant was, we have a formula. The comprehensive plan was approved. The zoning associated with that is consistent. I mean, we have ballpark rules that we wanna look at, but there's so many other variances that we need to be able to identify project by project that could fit, might not fit. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Well, in some sense, it's just as any other project in any other part of the city. Some projects will have a much easier time for subdivision, meeting our 8 standards of approval than others, right? I mean, others just, there'll be a lot of work involved to meet that, or some may not be attainable. You know, same with, we've had requests for rezoning that's just not compatible with our plans, you know. So that, I guess, in what the mayor is saying is true of any application ever. I mean, our standards stay the same. Land use and planning is a fairly black and white process. Applicants need to know what the standards are, how to meet them. If you deny them, you have to give them written requirements of what they can do to gain approval. That's required. So it can't be subjective. It's an objective. It's always an objective viewpoint as we go through what are our standards of approval? What about this application is met, is not met? But in certain areas, traffic's different, sewer is different, our infrastructure needs are, so those are considerations. Some developments generate a lot of traffic and are going to be required to put in a lot of infrastructure. You know?
That's why
But we do that at a staff
They do
level
that
on
already.
every project, so I
Already.
guess we're trying to figure out, what do you want the code to say?
To be a guide.
Because right now, the way the code reads, what you're talking about, we would do at a staff level on every project. So, it already reads that way. But we're not requiring a conditional use permit on every multifamily development.
Because the
That would be a
conditions
code,
are
that would
in
be a code
the code.
revision.
Right.
So I guess that's what we're trying to figure out is the code fine the way it is, or does it need some changes to it so that we can move forward?
I agree with the mayor about trying to target more commercial growth. And the only way I see we can do that is by zoning, by having that designation of commercial more than other residential or mixed zones. I mean, because otherwise, if you're trying to help pay for the future growth, we know commercial and industrial doesn't cost the city as much in services. The only way I see that we can do that is by having more acreage in those zones of commercial and industrial, and less in residential and mixed use.
With infrastructure.
Yeah, that's the only way I see we can do it, because I don't know how case by case you already have what's designated can be done within a mixed-use zone. Does that target more commercial?
In some cases, yes.
Yeah,
See, that's the
We
problem,
have
that's.
cases-
Right,
she's
that's the
right,
problem.
That's part of the issue.
That's why it's better, it's gonna have to be
Commercial.
commercial zone if we're gonna try to accomplish that.
Well, the mixed use zone as written today does allow for commercial. So
Right.
one option is the requirement of a certain percentage of commercial in a development.
So here's the,
I don't know, so that's something we've thrown
If you
out
have a
too.
big piece of property, if you have a small piece of property, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So
doesn't,
maybe that's the MU1 and the MU2.
Yeah, so
And
that's
maybe-
what we were talking about, maybe that's where we go.
Maybe it's parcel
with
size and it's on a certain grid of the city, you know.
so
with-
here's what makes it harder too. We used to sell commercial, people coming into our area to invest in manufacturing or computer use, or doesn't matter, all the times with economic development. We had a trained workforce that was available to serve. We had education, and we had comparative low cost of living overall. And now our workforce has changed, our cost of living has changed, I mean, and we need rooftops for the ability to be able to provide workforce.
Right.
And so the hard part, no, this is the
Can't have
ping pong
commercial
table
without
that we're playing in, and if we only have suburban or residential, that's not workforce availability, but do we let Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls, cause they're doing a great job of that right now, I mean, that's kind of how we are, they're already going there. Will our piece of the pie hurt us more than help drive commercial growth? Will we get to a point where we're so crowded, traffic-wise, sewer-wise, I don't know, that we're not contributing on a balance to the overall quality of life that exists in the county? It's okay to limit, to not be an advocate for the growth at certain levels, but commercial will help stabilize and pay for both. It's just an interesting time, and again, it's ping pong, and if we were, I think if Ed and I changed seats, Caitlin, you and I changed seats, and I was down there and you were up here.
You can't give me that chair.
But there's a responsibility too that, and this is hard, I've had 15 people come to me, not pleading, but not necessarily just asking, and saying, don't forget those that can't afford a $500,000 home. And my answer is, I mean, they're a part of our community too, they're a big part, and I don't know, so it's,
About everybody.
again, it's been an interesting time, and,
So what about the idea of on the larger mixed use parcels, maybe working a commercial requirement?
And that would be the M1, M2.
Right.
that could be, that was a great
That's
part of
thought
that.
on that. That's a possible thought.
And I wasn't gonna talk at all, cause it hurts, but anyway, maybe that's directionally where we wanna go, I don't know, but I don't know that the answer is reducing from 20 to 50, that's not where that's not directionally, I think, where either the council wants to go or citizens, and again, it's a moving target, the it's not an easy one to.
So for some staff guidance, would we wanna see some code directed in an M1, M2 with a base level in one of those zones and then a higher level?
Much more, I
zones,
mean,
and a
conceptually,
higher level and another one in areas of the city?
are we
Would
okay
come
on?
back with that, or?
And we need to close some level, but conceptually, that's where we are. I mean, we have to provide limits to that.
Well,
Anyway,
one of the reasons many years ago that we looked at annexing property around the airport was for that very reason.
Mhm.
Because we wanted jobs out there, the demands for services were less there and all that, and there's been some success, but there's still a lot of room for more. So, you know, we're lucky in some respect, cause we have that, a lot of places don't have it, but that's something we could look at maybe a little more too.
So,
that's true.
I mean, I'm not hearing something specific, we can have staff work
I
on
don't know that you'll get anything.
M1, 2, and some of that, it's not gonna solve everything, but we could come up with a couple things from what we've heard. The other part of what you mentioned was in relation to the letters that ties in with the density, because it's the mixed use, that we had planned on doing an open house. There was direction from the council in the open house, and we have scheduled for July 23rd. It's a Friday, from like 2:30 until, later in the evening. It's close to 80 days, so people coming in could come and answer any questions about the letters.
And we're targeting those people that received the letter.
Right,
Good.
right, that's what we talked about, is we sent a postcard to those folks that received, inviting them to come to this open house and answer any further questions, property specific type thing. After that, that's when the council wanted to then, make a decision, direction on moving forward with a hearing on the land use matter. So we have that step, and then those kind of converge back as far as density. So we can work on maybe what we've heard on this M1, M2 idea and come back with that. In the meantime, on the 23rd, have an open house for folks concerned on the letters. Anybody would be welcome to come. And then bring that information and try and, because we're just trying to get to a place where we can have staff move forward. So, is that okay? Does that sound?
Any further discussion? We'll adjourn the workshop and then convene at 5 o'clock for council.
There is some pizza in there, because